Hi, welcome back to another episode of Culture and Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. In this week's video, we're going to keep working on Brenda's Roadster. The main thing at this point in time that I can only work on is the wiring. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's out getting fixed, a bunch of parts ordered that potentially would let us work on other parts. But all I can offer right now is I am going to start working on where to run some of the main harnesses. Like I said at the end of the last video, the main wiring going to the front part of the car, which consists of the engine harness and the light harness, I would normally run them in two sections. One, I would run the lights down by where the clutch pedal is up to the front, and then the engine stuff would go through the firewall. In this case, with the way we've done the floor and the fact it's got a clutch pedal there, I'm leaning more towards going through one hole in the firewall and then splitting it off from there and running it. So I kind of have to, that's the first thing I got to do. There's still a bunch of wires here that are extra because it's a 20 wire circuit. A lot of the accessories and stuff on a Roadster you're just simply not going to use. So I'm going to double check on these ones. I will trim them off and put a cap onto them. More than likely pull the fuse out of the panel. And then I'm going to go over the different dash stuff. We did have a set of gauges for this car. Unfortunately, because we've realized that the speedo sending unit is not going to work on this particular transmission, what I'm suspecting is that we have an S10 tail housing which puts the shifter forward, and it may have like a Mustang or a Camaro tail shaft into it, so the speedo gear is not mounted where the speedo hole is. So what we've decided to do is get a GPS speedometer. So we're waiting on those gauges, so I won't be able to wire any of the gauges in until we get that stuff. Then on the front of the car, we were waiting for some pulleys and stuff to put the alternator in, but there was a hiccup with transportation, and it's got reordered, so we'll see when that comes in. And then of course you heard me say in the last video, if you watched it, we had a 32 Ford radiator for a flathead, really nice radiator, but for whatever reason when they made it, they put the drain plug on the front. That unfortunately interferes with the 32 grill shell, and it just doesn't work that way. So that's out getting fixed up. So we'll see if we get that back, and then we'll just work on whatever we can this week. So I'm still mapping out where to put the wiring harnesses, but the one thing we do have to do is to go from the fuse box here over to the center firewall, feed the gauges. There's going to be at least one, if not two harnesses probably going through a hole in the firewall there. Plus there'll be harnesses going and then going down the firewall. There's a few switches underneath the tunnel, such as access to the brake switch, the neutral safety switch, the fuel pump. That yellow wire coming out of the floor there is the fuel pump. So we got a few wires going there. And then as well, the harness that goes to the back of the car. What I've typically done on a car like this is I will run the rear harness from the fuse panel over down the firewall, and then it would go ultimately underneath the carpet, more than likely along this seam here. And then the seat is going to start here, so it'll go underneath the seat and then feed to the back. But what I don't have is really anything to attach it to the firewall, so probably should have thought of that beforehand. Some people will, put another shelf there. I mean, you could get the 3M stick-it things that you put a Ziploc through, but what I've done, I've built this little metal bracket here, if you can see it like that. Now what that'll do is it's going to mount up underneath the firewall. We'll paint it black. It's got a bunch of holes into it. So I'm going to use this to basically strap my wiring harness to it. I'm going to try my best here to show you. It is going to go right up there and match up with those holes. Those holes are where the radiator supports go through. So I'm going to use the bolts from the radiator support to support this bracket. And then that bracket will actually be what we hook all of the harnesses up to before they drop down and go either through the firewall or to the back of the car. So going to give that a coat of paint, and then we'll get it put in there and start moving some harnesses. Well, today all we have to do is work on the wiring. There's still more stuff on the way. Lots of stuff we can do on the wiring. What I did, that little metal bracket that I was talking about, I installed it. You can see where the radiator supports are here. So those are the bolts on the back that I use to create like a hanger. So you can see up there where I put the harness and I've tie wrapped it up against it. Do not be afraid to use tie wraps. As many as you want. You can always cut them off later. Put more on. They don't cost that much, but it's one way of keeping things really neat and tidy. Keeping track of where all the wires are. So what I've done now is I've got that place up on the firewall where I can strap the wires to it. I've come down the firewall there and I've drilled a hole in the firewall and I've put all of the lights and the engine wires through that one hole. And you can see there where I've put the plastic covering over the wires that are then going to go to the back of the car. So what we see here, I've used some metal clips to hold it to the floor. I'm actually going to go into town tomorrow and get some plastic ones, something that'll have a little bit of give to it, but not crush the wires. You need to have the protection on the wires. Potentially you could put it down through the hole and underneath, but where it is right there, I have it on my other cars with the wrapping onto it. It's not going to be anybody's way. There's going to be some padding on the floor. There's going to be some carpet on top of it. You're really not going to notice it. And it's only the painted section there where it's going to be covered, because the black section here is where the seat is going to go. So I'm going to get some more clamps. I'm going to push that cable over to the side and run it along the back. And then once I get some more coating there, I'll put it on the wires and continue wiring the back. I still have the two harnesses laid out here right now. So this is going to be all the gauges. This is the light section, and this is the harness that's going to go to the steering column for the blinkers and stuff. All of the accessories we didn't use. What I've done for now, I've left them about 2 feet long. The labels are still on them. I've put these caps on the end. I'm going to pull the fuses out. And what I'm ultimately going to do is I'll roll them up into a coil, and then I'm going to stick them up inside there so that the owner or the potential future owner, if they want to put cruise control in or power windows, we can't put power windows in, obviously, or a heater or anything like that, or a radio. All those wires are there that they can do it. They just have to pull the wire out. It's still labeled, but we're not going to use it. Now on the front, over here, what I've done is I put everything through the firewall. So right now, these two wires here will go to the solenoid. These wires here are going to feed the headlights and the blinkers. And these wires here are all the engine wires that will go to the alternator, the tach, wire for the tach, for the coil. I've left them long so that you can just leave them a couple feet long. I cut the extras off because they were super, super long. So I kept all the pieces just in case, we've got to splice something in later. The other two things, I actually hooked up a couple things. Hooked up the temperature sending unit and the fuel pressure unit. This is the horn, so I'm not sure. I kind of like to put the horn just down there. This harness was kind of strange because it had the brake light switch, which is, you can see it right there. It was in the gauge cluster, so in this harness here. So fish that out, and I have these two wires. Now what I'll have to do is I'll have to choose where I'm going to run them, but ultimately they have to go down there somewhere. So I don't know whether I'm going to put another hole in the firewall with the grommet, but we'll get it fished down to hook up to the brake switch down there. Now all of the wires that go across the engine, I'm going to cover them with some sort of a plastic or temperature resistant covering. The other thing I should mention, and I'll get into this later, I've talked about it in other videos too, the ideal connection on the end of the wire, obviously, is if you could put it on, use heat shrink, and then solder all your joints. That's the best. I'm not going to argue with it, but we all can't do that every time. So a lot of us use these pinch fittings. Now, these ones come with the kits. Throw them out. They're no good. Go get yourself one of these ones, which is basically a ratcheting one. Make sure that you pick the right fitting for the size of your wire. Once you crimp it, give it a really hard tug. Make sure that it does not come loose. If it comes loose, do it again. But don't be afraid to give it a good reef on the end. I mean, obviously, if you pull it too hard, you're going to break anything, but it should, after you crimp it, not come off. So just be sure. But like I said, those little pliers I threw away there, I just keep them. I never use them. Just keep them around for the videos and stuff like that. Don't use them. They're crap. Use the ratcheting one. And then the other thing too, I picked up a set of wire strippers. You can use a knife or something, but you risk cutting some of the copper wires. I've had this for years. I use it for electrical in the house and for wiring up the cars and stuff. So that's it for today. We're going to go get some more fittings and stuff and some clamps and some wire coverings tomorrow. And then we're going to carry on wiring some more. So I tried to keep going with as many of little things as I possibly could, but unfortunately there's a lot of things we're waiting for. I did manage to hook up the brake switch down there, ran some conduit around some of the wires. We've got a solenoid in right now for the starter, so this is where I kind of like to mount my solenoids for the Fords, just under the firewall here, so it's quite accessible. You can actually jump a car from here if you really need to, because the posts are accessible from this end, and it's kind of out of the way but still accessible there. So that's in. We did try to put the distributor in, but what we need to do is make a measurement on this particular distributor to find the depth. One option for it is take the cover off and to measure the distance to the center of the gear. Another option is to get the original distributor and take a measurement off of that. Now apparently taking this cover off is quite difficult because you got to drop the pan, everything's in its place. So the owner has the actual original distributor, so he's going to bring that up to me. Going to take a measurement on that, then we'll be able to put the distributor in place. I did manage to hook up another piece of the fuel line, but we're still waiting for a particular fitting to go on the carburetor so we can hook that final piece up there. Another thing I managed to do, we've got the cowl vent gasket in. Now I've put those in before. You have to use the expensive black super or yellow super weather and gasket adhesive from 3M. Don't go buying the cheap stuff. Essentially glue it in place, close the cowl vent, and leave it in place there until it cures up. Usually it cures up within a day. So that's in right now. Now on the inside, I did mess around a little bit more with the wiring. I separated out the wires. I probably said already. This is the starter wires. That's for the light switch. Those are the gauges. And then the extra ones are hanging there. And then over here, we've got the dimmer switch. One thing with that particular kit, I was missing one wire for the gauge lights, so it took a while to figure out where it was. And then also the power wire that went to the gauges. Basically had to search for it, found a red wire that wasn't marked of all, and then traced it back to the fuse panel. So I've got everything laid out. All the wires in these are ready to go. Now the backup switch, the gentleman owns this, he wants to have backup lights. So there is a backup switch on the T5 transmission, but it requires a special pigtail to fit inside. I tried every different little fitting I could, but ultimately I found some fittings. You could buy 5 of them on Amazon for like $12, so ordered those. Again, waiting for a part to come in to get that done. Then along the back, like I said, what we decided to do, or what they decided to do, they want the backup lights very discreetly put down here. So I'm going to make a little bracket so they discreetly fit right there, and then fish them up through. So kind of had some direction on that. So like I said, a lot of the stuff we wanted to move forward with this week, unfortunately, and even for the gauges and stuff, we realized with this particular transmission, we're not going to be able to use a gear-driven programmable speedometer or a gear-driven cable speedometer, just because what we think happened is that we've got a Camaro or a Mustang tail shaft with an S10 transmission, so that kind of puts the position of the speedo gear on the shaft out of relationship to where the hole is. Now the solution could be is to pull the transmission out, change the shafts and everything else, but what the gentleman decided to do was they're going to buy a GPS speedometer and gauge set to go in the dash. So again, that's going to be here in another week or two. So what I was left with was actually trying to figure out some future stuff. Now the gauge panel itself, he wanted to have an engine turning effect on this aluminum gauge panel. Now I also had I'm not sure where I stuck it. Okay. The ignition switch. This was pre-drilled basically for our ignition switch, but I didn't have the ignition switch that they had, so we had to open that up and then relieve the back here, machine this out so that the ignition switch would actually go in there. So I'm going to unscrew it here. And there, and then we can screw it on there. Normally I would put them in the center, but this was already pre-drilled out and that's where they want it, so that's where they're going to get it. But in order for the ignition switch to go in there far enough, I had to machine the back of this out. And it's like, well, I don't have a mill. I do have a very well-equipped woodworking shop, and aluminum kind of cuts a little bit like wood. So I went in the shop and I basically got my rotor, clamped this down on the table, and then I took the rotor and just gently machined this out here so it relieved it. So basically a rotor is a handheld mill. So there, it fits in far enough so that now I can engage it with a nut and hold it in place. So problem solved on that one. So he wanted us to engine turn this. As you can see, I've already started doing it. We've already done a video in the past on engine turning, but it was a quite popular video. We got lots of comments onto it and stuff. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. A lot of people have covered it, but I just want to I guess put it out there. It's actually pretty simple to do if you want to get that effect on a piece of metal. There's all kinds of things that you can use in order to do it. There's all kinds of tools that you can use. Now, in my previous video, I did something simple, and I had it's a little drum sander from a woodworking kit, and I glued a piece of Scotch-Brite on there. It worked quite well in the video that we did previously, but the only thing that would happen is that this Scotch-Brite, because it wasn't designed for using it that way, this would come off, so halfway through I'd have to glue on another piece. Now another option, you can do that. Another option is actually to get a wire brush here. Now the wire brush is quite aggressive, so I wouldn't really recommend it on aluminum, but you could do it on aluminum. But if you had something steel you wanted to engine turn, you could use the wire brush on the steel. So I'll just demonstrate here. And all you want to do is basically set a pattern up. You can get really particular and draw squares out and put dots onto it and stuff like that. But the original engine turning was done by hand. It wasn't done that way. So if you want that look, essentially just do one set of passes and you overlap at the center and then just repeat it. Just try and overlap the previous one by a half, like that. And you're going to get the desired effect. Now, you see engine turning on a lot of aircraft stuff. You see it on cars. You even see it on rifles and stuff. They jewel the bolt or whatever. It's just an engine turning they do on a round shaft instead of a flat piece. So, like I said, if you just have a wire brush, then it will do the trick. So right now, if I kept on going, I don't know if I can, there, sorry, I had to get the right reflection there. So you just keep going with that pattern on steel if you want to use the wire wheel. I've used other things, like I've got a little deburring tool here. Not sure where I got it from. Could have got it from where I used to work. I'm not sure when they threw it out. But essentially, if you insert that in there and press it down on a piece of metal, you'll get the same swirl mark. Now, the simplest thing that I've used so far, lately when I've done this, is that I just went and got the 3M roll lock, or the knockoff version. You can buy these little pads that go on the roll locks like that. Now that's too big, but just go get the tin snips and snip it off to a smaller diameter that suits you, like that. So that one is, that's what's left of the roll lock after I cut it down to size. Now the only thing with this, don't press too hard because you'll snap the little roll lock off. So you just have to apply a little bit of pressure. And like I said, I already started doing the dash. I don't want to bore you guys, but just apply pressure, gentle pressure, and let it dwell there for a couple seconds. Overlap the previous one by a half. And the thing is, if you don't like it, you can actually go over it again and just redo it. You just put another pattern on top of the old pattern. So I'm just going to keep on going here. I don't know if we'll show you the whole thing or not, but I'll show you the finished product here by the end of the video. Okay, and that's it. A little bit of aluminum dust, probably should be wearing a mask. Wear a mask anyways for the aluminum. So there it is. Engine turn dash. And like I said, if you think you made a mistake somewhere, just start over again. That's one roll lock. I didn't wear it out the first time around, so my new choice for doing this right now is to use that with a roll lock on it. Now, I know there's a specific tool that you can buy for 20 or 30 bucks from a company. I know that somebody's going to remind me what it was. I can't remember what it is, but look in the comments. Someone's going to post what the actual real tool is for doing it. But if you just want to do it yourself and you just have common tools around the house, there's lots of things, like I said, from a wire wheel to a glued on piece of Scotch-Brite to actually using a roll lock, that you could do this yourself and make something look really neat. So that's it for this week. A lot of little things, a lot of stops and starts. We did get a lot of stuff done, but we can only right now work on Brenda's Roadster until we can move it over in the other building. What it's looking like this week coming is that the weather's going to be in our favor so that we can actually move it over to the other building and continue with the assembly. And then we'll start getting on to some of the other work in the shop here. So we'll give you more variety hopefully next week. So hopefully you enjoyed it this week. Please like, share, tag, and subscribe. Send me your comments. Tell me what you think. And come on back next week and see what we're up to. Take care, everybody.